Buying your first synth is incredibly difficult, so in this video I am going to tell you what to buy. Well, maybe I'm going to try and tell you what to buy. And I guess it's always been a little bit difficult, but in 2024 it's particularly difficult because there is so much choice of great sounding synths at affordable prices. Now, this at the moment is probably sounding a little bit like a mind-reading magic trick because the elephant in the room is we don't actually know each other. That's true, but I think for the majority of use cases, it comes down to only two models. And if you still can't make your mind up out of those two, I'll tell you at the end, which is the one model that I'm currently recommending to pretty much everybody and have been recommending for a long time. But let me first start by just telling you what kind of person you probably are and who this video is made for. It's made for people that use soft synths in electronic music productions or electronic music. So you're probably an electronic producer, or maybe you're a beat maker. You might be a songwriter that uses soft synths. Those soft synths probably, by the way, sound pretty good. And you're interested in getting a piece of hardware because you think it's going to be fun. You're going to get your hands on the knobs. Maybe you think it's going to sort of sound better. And you sort of want to learn all about synthesis, and that is a very good idea. And before I break down how to take 500 synth models and figure out which of the two or one actually are the best first synth for someone like you, let me start by reinforcing some of those reasons why it's a good idea, but kind of dispelling one myth. If you think that your soft synths aren't sounding very good and a hardware synth is going to sound better, you're going to be disappointed. The reality is that current soft synths do an incredible job of sounding incredible. Now, there are still some edges that hardware has over them. And note that I'm saying hardware rather than analog because the main advantage is the ability to turn knobs in real time, use both hands, and you can dial up sounds super quickly that are much more about what you want, and you can tweak them while they're being played and recorded, and it's much better than automation. Much better. That's probably too many muches, isn't it? But you get the picture. So it's not actually so much about the sound quality. I wouldn't necessarily say that some of those soft synths out there don't sound as good, and I'm not sure I'd say I could tell in a production if they were soft or hardware. But what I can say is that I am able to create sounds on my hardware synths very quickly. That's exactly what I want. Tweak them in the context of a mix, tweak them while they're being tracked. There's a few other things that come out of that. You will find that when you use hardware synths, you finish tracks faster. Isn't that incredible? Much faster. I'll tell you why. Because the sound that you actually record, you're kind of stuck with. You don't kind of go, oh, well, this kind of bass sounds all right, but I'll always go back and change it. You won't do that at all. You end up sort of committing. It forces you to commit. You can always go and re-record it, but the extra admin of going back and re-recording it is enough of a barrier, basically speaking. So you end up recording parts quicker, recording sounds better, and here's the kicker. When it comes down to mixing, turns out it's much easier to mix. When I used to do productions with soft synths and I'd have 20 or however many different layers of different parts, I'd always be like processing and tweaking and processing and tweaking, never quite getting it right, if I'm honest, never quite getting happy. Now I'm using hardware, overwhelmingly analog hardware, but hardware, I'll have like 30 tracks of synths and I'll balance them. I don't really process them. Some of them I might compress a bit. Don't really EQ them very much. Occasionally a little bit, but not very much. So that is a really good reason. But now we come to what I believe is the fundamental reason to get the right kind of hardware synth. It's how you learn how to program synthesizers. Now that might or might not be something that you particularly want to do, but the moment that you figure out really how to program synths, the whole universe opens up to you, and it turns out you're much better at programming soft synths as well. So before we even get into the criteria, we're already starting to realize one thing, which is this: whatever synth you get, It's got to be fun. And it's got to be the kind of synth you can learn on. That second part will eliminate various synths later on. Okay, so I fully applaud you doing this. Oh, and by the way, when you do get a synth, I'll tell you exactly what you should do when you crack open the box, which is really simple. You should get out some of your existing electronic productions and you should hook up your synth, probably using USB, if I'm honest. Oh, so maybe we're talking about USB support as well as MIDI. But yeah, USB, you could use MIDI if you've got MIDI cables and interface, and then just immediately take some of your lead lines and bass lines and put them through your synth and start turning knobs. That'll be just like such an amazing process. So we're already starting to zoom in on the kind of thing that's going to work and the kind of thing that's not going to work. But let's tackle, in many ways, well, it might not be the most important thing, but in some ways it's everything, which is budget. What is the minimum amount of money you can get away with to spend in getting the right kind of synth? Well, let's start with a ludicrously small amount of money. Could you spend less than $100? You could get a good analog synth for under $100, but I don't recommend it, and I'll tell you why. I'm thinking in particular of the Korg Volca series. They are excellent. They sound really good. They might tick the fun box a bit, but they won't really tick the learning all about synthesis box. They're really good, but they kind of have a cut down feature set. So to be honest, the best thing I could say about the Volcas is that where if you buy one and then you decide you don't like it, you can sell it and you probably won't have lost very much money. You might even gain money depending on what happens. So it's a very small investment. But I don't think that's going to tick all your boxes. The whole point in many ways of getting a proper hardware synth is to learn how to use proper hardware synths. And that means that you're going to need a slightly larger feature set than any of the Volcas offers. But the next rung up in terms of cost, you can absolutely get what you want. And I would describe that as the pay no more than $250, including postage and packing, rung. And I think you should buy secondhand. And the two synths that I'm thinking of, but many more, you can get for that price on eBay or Facebook Marketplace or Reverb, you know. And I'm going to end up recommending one where there are quite a few available at the right price. And that also means if you ever want to get rid of them, you can probably sell them pretty easily. But that $250 is an upper limit. I saw one this morning for more like $210. I think it's generally quite important. Even if you set yourself a budget and say, well, $250 is a great price, still try and get it for $220 or $210. But I think that's a good upper limit. It's not a huge amount of money, mainly because you're tying up money in a synth, but you can sell the synth. Try selling a plugin. It's really difficult. The world is littered with electronic music producers like me who've bought so many plugins we can't even remember what we've got. There's so much overlap, it's not true. And I, like so many people, we've got a whole lot of Waves plugins that we bought for $30 and some really expensive plugins for like 100, 150, 200, sometimes even more. And, you know, I've got outboard equipment that costs that much, and when I stop using it, I sell it. When I stop using one of these plugins, I can't sell it. And so there is that kind of truth. Now, there are some things that plugins, you know, only plugins can do, and I do all my mixing inside the box and, you know, blah, 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 blah. But it is important to remember that when you spend whatever you spend on a synth, you are just kind of tying up your money into it. And especially if you research it in advance, you'll know what you can sell it for. You might not lose very much money at all. You might even make money. So there's that. $250 upper limit, including postage and packaging, should be the maximum amount you spend on this. Right. Let's go on to the next thing. What is the next thing? Well, I suppose form factor might be the next thing. Well, I'm going to put form factor in with feature set because I want to come back to this point that you've got to be able to learn how to do synthesis on this thing, okay? So I think it's going to need a minimum number of features, and those features are this. It should have at least 2 oscillators, and I mean 2 proper oscillators. I don't mean 1 oscillator and a sub, right? Those are great, but for what you want, which is to learn how to do this properly, you're going to need 2 oscillators. 2 is fine, 3 would be a bonus, but 2 is fine. Those oscillators at a minimum both need to be able to make a sawtooth and a square wave, and maybe some various kind of pulse waves. Pulse width is nice, but not critical. They need to be independently mixable. So you sort of turn them on and off and mix them. You do need a noise oscillator. Of course, they need to be independently tunable. You need at least 1 LFO and some kind of way of applying LFO to various different aspects. You know, not only pitch, maybe the filter, maybe something else. Coming onto the filter, it's got to be a good filter. It's got to sound good, whether it's 4-pole or 2-pole, whatever filter it is, it's got to sound good. It's got to sound good with resonance. You got to be able to vary the amount that you can apply a filter envelope to, and it must have a separate filter envelope. It doesn't particularly matter if it's ADSR or whether the decay doubles of the release, which you get in a lot of synths. Similarly for the VCA, you must have a VCA envelope, and likewise keyboard tracking is nice, but you don't need to have huge granularity. And I think that's basically it. Oh, no, it's not. Sorry, portamento. You've got to have portamento/glide. You don't need some of the fancy controls that you get around that, but you must have that. There's some basic utility sounds where it's a very important sound. So that's the kind of thing where if you look at the Korg Volcas, which are fantastic, I'm not saying anything against them. They don't have quite that full feature set, but a lot of other synths do. So it's also got to be a sort of teaching/learning synth. So I am saying it must be a WYSIWYG synth, for want of a better word, by which I mean you should be able to look at the controls, hear the sound, and the controls relate to the sound. In other words, what I'm saying is this: it should not have presets. And that might be very controversial, because you think, well, if I can get presets, wouldn't I want them? Yeah, sure, once you've figured out how to properly use synths. But once you haven't, or before you have, what I'm saying is that you should look at the controls, and the controls refer exactly to the sound coming out of your synth. That means no presets, and invariably it also means a mono synth. So let me go further. If money were not such a constraint, and if you could afford to get a poly version with presets, don't do it. Get the mono version, learn everything there is to know about how to use that particular kind of, to use a technical term, subtractive synthesis, and then you can use a polysynth. Because when you use a polysynth with presets, you can call up the preset and go, oh no, you know what the problem is there? Actually, it's a problem with the decay on the filter envelope, or I think I need to change the release, or I think the keyboard tracking isn't right. Yeah, sure, once you've got that level of expertise. But before you have, learn on a WYSIWYG, 1 knob per function synth, no presets, no menus, mono. So much you can do with that. Don't think that there's anything like cheap and cheerful about mono. So much music has been made with mono synths over the years. You can get them to do amazing, amazing things. I've made tracks in the past which people love, which are a single mono synth over like a kick drum and percussion, you know, with the right amount of reverb and delay. So don't worry about that. But we are going to be looking at a mono synth, a WYSIWYG synth with a minimum feature set and a certain budget. We're kind of almost there, to be honest. Should it have a keyboard? In my view, it shouldn't have a keyboard. Pause to drink some coffee. What I want to do is I want to spit out the coffee and do a spit take and go, why shouldn't it have a keyboard? I'll tell you why it shouldn't have a keyboard. We're trying to do this on a budget, right? So you don't want to spend money on a key bed when you don't need a key bed. Well, why don't you need a key bed? Well, I'll tell you why you don't need a key bed. If you need a key bed, you've already got a key bed. If you're a player, you've almost certainly already got a key bed, and it'll be better than a 2-octave key bed that you'd get out of a sort of a mono synth. And if you haven't, you don't need one. Because what you've got is you've got a whole load of MIDI clips already programmed into your DAW/sequencer of choice. And so the short answer is you don't need one. It takes up extra desk real estate most of the time. It's either very low quality, which you don't want, or it's high quality, in which case you're paying for it. It'd be much better to pay for another oscillator, right? There's a really good Arturia synth, which is an excellent learning synth. And I think it's called the Mini Brute, but it might be called the Micro Brute. I can't remember. It's such a brilliant teaching synth. It's almost fully featured enough, apart from the fact it doesn't really have two oscillators. It's sort of got one oscillator and a sub, and it's got a key bed, and that key bed is actually really good. It's only 2 octaves. Well, no, actually, I mean, if you've already got one of those, like I have, go with God, because that is a great bit of kit. Oh, and by the way, if you have got one of those and sometimes you think that it sounds a bit too harsh, just stop driving the oscillators into the filter so hard. Just don't push the oscillators up more than 50% and you'll be absolutely fine. Everyone on the internet, I know this is a digression, sorry. Everyone on the internet telling you that synth sounds too harsh, they just don't know how to use it. They're overdriving the oscillators or the oscillator shape into the filter. So just back them off a lot and all of a sudden it'll soften up. Or turn it up and get that kind of nice Arturia-like distortion. But it's not right. Well, it's not what I'm recommending. Coming back to you, the viewer, it's not what I'm recommending for your first synth. I'd rather that the money and the budget went towards another proper oscillator than that keyboard. So, have we covered everything? I think so. So, can I just recap what we're talking about? Spend no more than $250, including P&P. It's going to be a desktop form factor. It's going to be WYSIWYG, 1 knob per function. Of course, it's going to have modern MIDI. Of course, it is. No keyboard. It's got to sound great. Oh, there's 2 more things. Firstly, what are you using it for? Well, you're obviously not going to use it for chords, but then again, if you make music with chords, maybe you have... Gosh, I've really got into trouble there. Let me rephrase that. Whenever I make music with chords, I have self-esteem issues. I am not saying anything against you, the viewer. But seriously, try doing stuff with mono melodies, and it's doing chords a little bit like cheating, isn't it? Well, I might have to edit that bit out. Never mind. I think I've just offended both of my subscribers. But you're going to use it for bass, and it should be really good at bass. This kind of stuff sounds unbelievable at bass. You dial up a theremin patch on one of these synths. It's going to sound good, but it's not going to sound a million miles away from your soft synths. But there is something really special going on with analog hardware bass. My theory is partly to do with the fact it's so difficult to tune, and it's probably not very well calibrated, because our perception frequency is so bad at the low frequency ranges. So if you've got like some really big single oscillator, sawtooth or square wave, it'll just thunder away and it won't quite be in tune actually, and it'll be kind of drifting a bit over the course of about 40 minutes. Sounds unbelievably good. Unbelievably good. Welcome to the world of imprecise voltage controlled oscillators. It's just so human. So you're going to be using it for bass, and you're going to love it for bass. But the other thing I'd say is this, and it comes back to the point I made earlier. Don't get something, I'm not going to recommend something which is just a little bit specialist, because you're not really going to get any advantage from it, and it'll be harder to buy and harder to sell, and in particular harder to sell. I'll give you a couple of examples. So there's a really good Behringer clone of a synth called the Wasp, and there's another one of a clone called the Cat. Neither one of those synths kind of particularly set the world on fire when they were actually introduced. I think the Wasp might have been used on Kids in America by Kim Wilde, but I mean, it was a cheap synth back then. And these clones by Behringer, they sound amazing and they are amazing, but honestly, they're going to be much harder to resell than some of the more popular clones, or put it another way, clones of more popular instruments. I suppose just before I tell you therefore what we get down to, I'm just going to do the honourable mentions. Yes, the IK multimedia stuff is really good and probably available at the price point. But no, I don't recommend it because I don't believe they're very good to learn synthesis on. It doesn't feel like a sort of a good old-fashioned one knob per synth. Feel free to get the one I'm recommending, learn how to use it, and then swap it out for the Uno or something like that if you want. The Novation Bass Station, what a synth. Sounds great. Sounds amazing. It doesn't quite have a wide enough palette, and again, it doesn't quite fit into the feature criteria. So I'm only mentioning those just because I don't want people to think that I've particularly overlooked anything when I tell you what the choices for you should be. And here they are, in no particular order. The Behringer Model D and the Behringer Pro 1. Both of those clones are excellent reproductions, not particularly of the form factor, but excellent reproductions of the originals, which are of course the Moog Model D and the Sequential Circuits Pro 1. The Moog Model D needs sort of no introduction. 3 oscillators, unbelievable sounding filter. Choice of noise, white noise, pink noise, and I think that's a reason to buy a synth, but you know. And the Sequential Circuits Pro 1 is still to this day Vince Clarke's favourite mono synth. If you don't know who Vince Clarke is, look him up. It's with an E. One of the reasons why he likes it is because the envelopes are so fast, and that's honestly one of the reasons why I like the Pro 1 so much. You would not go wrong if you bought either one of those. Either one of those will teach you a lot about subtractive synthesis, but I have to say, with great regret, one of them will teach you more. The Model D has 3 oscillators, but that doesn't really matter. However, the Pro 1, with only 2 oscillators, there's 2 sounds which are very important that you can get out of it that you can't get out of the Model D. One of them is that you can do proper pulse width and you can do pulse width modulation. That's very important for certain kinds of bass sounds. And the other one is that you can do hard sync to one of the oscillators. So if you know what you're doing, it's kind of an advanced patch, but you can get all those amazing Daft Punk type sounds. You can't get those out of a Model D, but I'm not saying don't get the Model D. I think 2 guys who are professional TV music producers. They do it all in the box because, you know, they need to be able to recall sounds when they get notes back. But they do permit themselves one analog synth, and that one analog synth is the Behringer Model D. And it sounds amazing. So you can really learn about oscillator tuning and how to embrace the sounds of your VCOs going out of tune and learn to love it. And you know how to play with the filter and ride the filter, and you're going to find yourself playing with your right hand while the filter's on the left hand, and you're not actually relying on envelopes and automation. You're literally turning it, and you know, maybe as you turn the resonance up, compensating with the volume, all that kind of good stuff, but with a very heavy heart indeed. If I had to pick one and people say to me, what should I get? My answer is the Behringer Pro 1. It doesn't always sound better than the Model D. Sometimes it sounds not as good, but you don't get enough compensation from the Model D for the features that it doesn't have. I think you do need pulse width modulation. I think you want it. I think you also want the ability to sync oscillators, because that's a whole avenue that you can go down. And there are a couple of other things. It is actually easier to do drone sounds on the Pro 1 because you flick a switch marked drone. The second thing that I haven't seen anyone talk about is that when you get your synth home and you call up some MIDI that you'd done a year ago, and it's whatever it is, the bass line, and the way that you wrote it probably means that the MIDI notes are like butting up against each other. You don't do that on the Model D, and you're going to find that it plays it as legato, and so it doesn't re-trigger the amp envelope, which is a huge problem. So then what you have to do is you have to go into your DAW and like to shorten all of the MIDI notes a bit, so there's a bit of a gap. It's just not ideal. On the Pro 1, you get exactly the same thing, but you can flick it up into retrigger mode, which means every time the MIDI note changes or maybe just gets refired, the amp envelope gets refired again. So it's a slightly more practical synth as well. I like the fact that on the Pro one there's a lot more play in the knobs because it's got a much faster envelope. You know, you can put the decay up to about, you know, halfway or something like that, and you're getting really good sounds. Whereas if you want to get, for example, a pluck sound on the Model D, you've got to just tune it in. But I feel so bad like slagging off the Model D because I love it. But if you get what I'm recommending, which is the Behringer Pro 1, you will learn how to program synths. Well, especially if you try and learn it, you know, frankly, watch my videos or anyone else's videos, learn how to make all the utility sounds, learn how to make a pluck, learn how to make an Italian bass, learn how to make a pulse width bass, learn how to make a drone, learn how to make a theremin, learn how to make crystal leads, all those good sounds, and learn how to go between them really, really, really quickly. Bang, 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 bang. Oh, and there's one more thing which everyone's going to laugh at, but I actually prefer the knobs on the Pro 1, and that's not just an aesthetic point, it's a point about recall. The way you store a synth patch is you take a photograph of it. It's as simple as that. I don't really appreciate some silver knob with a tiny little dot on it, because it's not just I have to peer at it under bright light. If I've taken a photograph of it, I can't read it. The reason why, as some of you guys have noted, I change all the knobs on my synths is not because I'm like pimping them. It's to assist me with recall when I take photographs. I've got knobs with very strong white lines. I didn't actually have to change them on the Pro 1. They've already got strong white lines, but I did change them because I wanted to color code my VCA and my filter envelope, my glide and my portamento, because I was still learning where all the knobs were on the synth, right? And that can be a nice thing to do, but you don't need to. But what you do need is you do need knobs with strong white lines, so that when you find a patch that you like, you just take a photograph of it and you label it in your phone. That's what everyone does. To be honest, people have been doing that since the 1980s, taking Polaroids of gear. That's the right way of doing it. So you can fill in patch sheets if you like, but, you know, Christ, I've got a patch sheet up there for a Vox Humana patch, which is patched between 3 of these, and it's a bloody nightmare. But the best thing to do is just to take photographs. So where are we? I've rambled on for a long, long time. I probably lost my audience a long time ago. Let me recap. If you're thinking of buying a first synth and you use soft synths and you're an electronic producer or beat maker, do yourself a favour, stop thinking about it, get the Behringer Pro 1, get it second hand for under $250 including shipping. Learn how to use it. Give it 3 months. Learn how to use it properly. I'm going to say it again. Learn how to use it. Watch videos, watch my videos, watch other people's videos. If you really don't like it after 3 months, sell it and you'll probably get what you paid for it. That's the synth that I recommend. Now, fight me in the comments.